Picture, for a moment, a single stick figure standing alone on the crest of a low hill, drawn in a few plain lines against a wide evening sky. Two dots for eyes, a round, open face, thin arms resting at her sides. Above her, the stars are coming out one by one, the very same stars you could walk outside and see tonight. And she is looking up at them the way you might, with her head tipped back and her whole small body gone still. This is our stick figure. Her name is Ela. She does not know it yet, but she is one of the last of something. She is living in a world that is about to become far emptier than it has ever been, and she is going to be there to watch it happen. I want you to hold on to that image of Ayla on the hill, because to understand her story, you first have to understand the strangeness of the world she was born into. And it truly was strange, stranger than almost anything we imagine when we think about the deep past. Because in Ella's time, there was more than one kind of human on the earth, not more than one tribe, not more than one people with different faces or different words for the moon. More than one kind of human, different creatures, as different from one another as a wolf is from a fox. And yet all of them people, all of them walking upright, all of them making fire, all of them burying the ones they loved. If you could have floated above the world in those days and looked down, you would have seen at least 5, maybe 6 different kinds of human being, each in their own corner of the map, each certain in their own way that they were simply what a person was. Draw them for a moment, all in stick figures, so we can tell them apart by the plainest of shapes. There were Ela's own people, the tall, thin ones with the high round heads, the ones we would eventually call by our own name. Far to the west and the north, across cold valleys and under gray skies, there was a second kind, drawn shorter and broader, heavier through the chest, with a strong ridge over the brow like a shelf of bone above the eyes. To the east, in mountains so distant that Ela's people only knew them from stories, there was a third kind, a people we still barely know at all. And on an island far across warm water, so small you could have walked its length in a day, there lived a fourth kind, a tiny people, waist high, no taller than a child, but fully grown, fully human, with their own tools and their own fires and their own dead to bury. There may have been others too, hidden in places no story ever reached. 6 ways of being human, all at once, all real, all here, and now, tonight, as you watch this, there is only one. Just us. One kind of human, alone on a planet that used to be so much more crowded with minds. Every other kind is gone. And the question of what happened to them, of where the other humans went, is one of the oldest and heaviest questions our single surviving kind has ever tried to answer. It is not a comfortable question. The honest answer, the one that follows the evidence instead of the story we would prefer, turns out to be far messier and far more uncomfortable than almost anyone wants it to be. So, let us follow Ela down off her hill, and let us find out. When Ela was young, her people came into a new valley. Watch the little line of stick figures walking over a ridge in the gray light of morning, carrying bundles on their backs, children riding on shoulders, an old woman leaning on a stick at the rear. They had walked a long way to get here, across more country than any one of them could hold in their head, following the herds and the seasons and the rivers. And when they came down into this green valley with its cold, clean stream, they thought at first that they had found an empty land, a gift, a place with no one else in it. They were wrong. On the third evening, Ella was crouched by the stream, filling a skin with water when she looked up and saw, on the far slope across the valley, a thread of smoke rising into the dusk. A fire. And around the fire, small in the distance but unmistakable, a cluster of figures. She went very still, the way she had gone still under the stars. She counted them. She watched the way they moved. And even from across the whole width of the valley, she could see that they were not her people. They were shorter, they were broader, they moved differently, heavier, and lower to the ground. And when one of them stood up straight against the last of the light, she saw the shape of the head, that strong shelf of bone above the eyes, and something cold and old moved through her chest. Here was another kind of person. Here were the brow people. And Ella's valley was not empty after all. It had never been empty. It was shared. Now, I need you to understand something about the brow people, because everything that follows depends on you understanding it correctly. When we tell this story badly, when we tell it the way it flatters us to tell it, We imagine that Ella's people were bright and clever and fully awake, and that the Brow people across the valley were something less, half animal, grunting, dull, waiting to be swept aside by their betters. That is the story we like. It is also completely false. The Brow people, the ones we call the Neanderthals, had been living in that cold northern world for something close to 400,000 years. 400,000. Ella's kind were newcomers, blow-ins, latecomers to a land these people had held since before Ella's whole lineage existed in its present form. And in all that time, the Brow people had not been sitting in the dark. Their brains were as large as Ella's, in some of them, larger. Let that land for a second. If you measured the space where the mind sits, the Brow people had as much of it as we do, or more. Watch what they did with it. Ella, over the following weeks, could not stop watching them, from a careful distance at first, hidden in the tree line, telling herself she was only being cautious. She saw a Brow man sit for the better part of a day working a piece of stone. He did not simply smash it and hope. He turned it in his broad hands, studying it, and then he struck it in a precise sequence, flake after flake, each blow set up by the last, until out of the raw rock came an edge so keen and so deliberate that Ela understood she was watching not luck but knowledge, a craft passed down through more generations than her people had names for. She saw them tend to fire and keep it and carry it. She saw them hunt animals so large and so dangerous that they had to close in on foot, at arm's length, driving their spears home from close enough to feel the beast's breath. And she saw the terrible healed scars this left on their bodies, ribs that had broken and knitted, arms that had shattered and mended crooked. And that, the scars, was where Ela's fear first cracked open into something else. Because a broken body does not heal on its own out on the cold plain. A Brow man with a shattered leg cannot hunt, cannot gather, cannot keep himself alive. For those bones to knit, for that man to survive weeks and months of helplessness, someone had to feed him. Someone had to bring him water and keep him warm and guard him while he could do nothing in return. Ella saw an old Brow woman, toothless, half-blind, kept alive, and cared for long past the age when she could give anything back to the group except her presence and her memory. The Brow people cared for their weak. They carried their old. They did not leave their broken behind. Whatever Ella had feared, whatever her people whispered about the strangers across the valley, she was looking at tenderness. She was looking at a kind of love she recognized, because it was the same love that kept her own grandmother alive on the shoulders of the young. Then, one gray morning, Ela watched the Brow people bury one of their dead, a child, small and still. They did not simply leave the body for the cold to take. They dug into the earth. They laid the little one down with care, arranged, deliberate, and one of them scattered something over the grave. Color, the deep red of ochre or the soft petals of flowers. Ayla could not tell from her distance, but she understood the gesture in her bones. It was the gesture of people who did not believe that death was the simple end of a thing. It was grief given a shape. And later, she saw the Brow people mark their own skins and their own faces, with that same red streaks and lines that meant nothing she could read, but clearly meant something. An art, a language of the body, a way of saying, I am this and not that. I belong to these and not those. The Brow people made meaning. They mourned. They decorated themselves. They were, by any measure Ella had, by any measure you have, people, fully and completely people. I am telling you all of this so carefully because of what comes next. Because roughly 40,000 years ago, not long, in the slow time of the earth, after Ella's kind arrived in the lands of the Brow people were gone, vanished. All 400,000 years of them, the tool makers and the mourners and the ones who carried their old, simply ended. And the timing is not subtle. It is not a coincidence you have to squint to see. Wherever Ella's kind arrived, within a handful of thousand years, the Brow people of that place were no more. It happened in one valley, and then the next, and then the next, the same grim rhythm playing out across a whole continent. Our kind arrives. The other kind disappears, over and over. It is exactly the pattern you would expect to see if the arrival of Ella's people was the cause of the Brow people's end. And so, the oldest and darkest version of the question raises its head, the one that has haunted us ever since we first understood that we had cousins and that our cousins are gone. Did we kill them? Did Ela's people, did our people, hunt down and slaughter the Brow people, wipe them from the earth in something we would have to call, if we are honest, an extermination? It is the most dramatic answer. It is the one that grips the imagination hardest, because it says something terrible about what we are, that our very first act on the world stage, before history, before writing, before cities, was to erase every other kind of human who shared the planet with us. So we have to take it seriously. And to take it seriously means to actually look carefully at what the evidence can and cannot tell us. Because the truth, as usual, refuses to be as simple as the story. Here is what Ella actually saw of violence between her people and the Brow people. She saw it, yes. There were clashes. Watch one now. A stand of woods, late in a hard autumn, two hunting parties coming on the same wounded deer from opposite sides, the animal thrashing and dying between them, and both groups arriving at once, hungry, tired, frightened, each seeing in the other a threat to the food their children needed to survive the coming winter. Watch the stillness. Watch the way stick figure hands tighten on stick figure spears. It does not take much. A shout, a shove, a spear raised, and then, before anyone quite decides it, thrown. Someone falls. Someone bleeds into the leaves. It happened. Ela saw it happen, and she carried the memory of it, the shame of it, for the rest of her life. But here is what she did not see, and what we, looking back across 40,000 years, cannot find either. She did not see a war. She did not see armies. She did not see her people set out, season after season, with the deliberate purpose of finding every Brow person on the earth and destroying them. And when we go looking in the bones, the actual physical remains of the Brow people, for the evidence of that kind of systematic slaughter, we mostly do not find it. There are Brow skeletons with injuries, yes. But when you hold such a bone in your hand and ask, was this wound made by one of Ella's people, or by another Brow person in a quarrel, or by a fall, or by a hunting accident, or by the slow, crushing weight of the earth itself over 40,000 years, the terrible truth is that the bone very often cannot tell you. Ancient violence leaves marks that whisper rather than shout, and 40,000 years of stone and pressure blur even those whispers. There is no great pile of evidence, no smoking spear, that says, here where we massacred them. Now, be careful. The absence of that evidence is not proof of our innocence. A slaughter spread thin across a whole continent, and 10,000 years would not leave one dramatic grave for us to find, so we cannot say it did not happen. But we also cannot say it is the whole story, or even the main one, because there is another kind of evidence, and this evidence does not whisper. It shouts, and it complicates everything. The evidence is inside you. Right now, if your ancestors came from anywhere outside of Africa, then somewhere between 1 and 4 out of every 100 pieces of the instructions that build your body, the code written in every cell of you, is not the inheritance of Ella's kind at all. It is the inheritance of the Brow people, the neanderthals. It is in you as you watch this. In some peoples of the Far East and the distant islands, there is even more of it, which means something that stops the story of pure extermination in its tracks. It means that Ela's people and the Brow people did not only fight, they also, sometimes, somewhere, loved. They lay together. They made children together, children who lived and grew and had children of their own, and those children carried a little of the Brow people forward, and their children after them, down and down through 400 centuries, until here it is. In you, a small, warm thread of a vanished kind of human woven into the fabric of what you are. You cannot exterminate a people and marry them at the same time. Not completely. The two do not fit. A kind that met the Brow people only with spears would not carry their blood today. So, whatever happened between Ela's people and the Brow people, it was not one thing. It was not a single, simple story of hatred and murder. It was proximity. It was contact. It was, at least sometimes, in some valleys, in some years, tender, and at the same time, In other valleys, in other years, it was blood in the autumn leaves. It was both. It was everything a long, complicated relationship between two peoples over thousands of years can be. And that mixture, that maddening refusal of the past to give us one clean villain and one clean victim, is the first hard truth of Ella's story. The end of the Brow people was not a single crime. It was something slower, quieter, more diffuse, and, in a strange way, more disturbing, because it cannot be laid at the feet of any one wicked act. Let me show you the quieter killers. They are the ones that really did the work. Start with the one almost no one imagines, the one that leaves no mark at all, and may have done more than any spear ever did: disease. Watch what happens the winter. A group of Ela's people, traveling from far away, come to trade with the Brow people across the valley. It is a friendly meeting, this one. There is no fighting. There is warmth, gifts exchanged, food shared, perhaps more than food. But Ella's people, in their long journey out of the warm south, had passed through many lands and met many sicknesses, and their bodies, over countless hard generations, had learned to survive, some of them. They carried these sicknesses inside them now, the way you carry a cold you have already beaten, barely a cough, hardly a fever. The Brow people, isolated in their cold north for hundreds of thousands of years, had never met these things. Their bodies knew nothing of them, had no defense, no memory in the blood. And so, some weeks after that warm and friendly meeting, watch the Brow people begin to fall. Not from any wound, from something invisible. First one, then a whole family, then most of the band. Burning with fever, unable to rise, the strong going down as fast as the weak, the healer able to do nothing, because you cannot fight what you cannot see. Ella's kind had brought death into that valley, not on the point of a spear, but in the warmth of their own breath, and they never even knew they had done it. This is not a fantasy. We have watched it happen in recorded history, whole peoples cut down by the sicknesses of strangers to whom those same sicknesses were barely an inconvenience. A visitor does not have to raise a hand to empty a village. And here is the cruelest part for anyone who wants a clear answer. When a Brow person died of a fever 3 months after a peaceful trade, the bones they left behind look exactly like the bones of a Brow person who died peacefully of old age. Disease is the killer that erases its own tracks. It could have swept through the Brow people again and again, doing more than any war, and left us nothing to find. Now, add the cold. Ayla lived in a hard time, a time when the whole world could not seem to make up its mind. The weather lurched and staggered. Warm centuries gave way to bitter ones and back again, faster than any people could adjust. Watch the Brow people in a killing winter, the herds thin, the ground iron, the young and the old dying first. The band shrinking season by season, not from any enemy, but from the sheer weight of a world that had turned against them. And here is the thing about a people already stretched thin, already struggling, already fewer than they were. They are fragile. A strong, full, healthy people can absorb a bad year, a new rival, a hard shock. A people already worn down to the edge cannot. The Brow people were being ground down by the cold long before Ella's kind became many in their lands, and a people being ground down is a people one hard push from vanishing. And then, last of the quiet killers, and perhaps the most important, there is the one that requires no hatred at all, no sickness, no storm, just arithmetic, competition. Watch it not as a battle, but as a slow, patient, year-over-year contest that neither side even understood they were in. Ella's people and the Brow people wanted the same things. The same deer, the same caves, the same sheltered valleys, the same good hunting ground, by the same bend in the same river. Two kinds of human reaching for one world's worth of food. And in that quiet contest, Ela's people held a handful of small advantages that, added up over 1,000 years, became everything. For one, Ela's people threw better. Watch a Brow hunter and an Ela hunter side by side against the same herd. The Brow man must come close, dangerously close, and drive his heavy spear home by hand, risking his body every single time, which is why his bones carry all those terrible healed breaks. But Ella's hunter carries a thrower, a clever length of wood and bone that turns her arm into something longer and stronger, and launches her light spear across a distance the Brow man could never manage. And later, Watch her draw a bow and strike from farther still, without ever closing the gap, without ever risking the goring, the trampling, the shattered leg. Over one hunt, the difference is small. Over 10,000 hunts, the difference is a people that eats and a people that starves. And there was a second advantage, harder to see, but maybe greater. Watch how far Ella's people reach. Look at the shells around her neck, come from a sea she has never seen, days and days away, passed hand to hand along a chain of friendships that stretches farther than any brow person's world ever did. Look at the ochre, the pigment, traded across enormous distances. Ella's people were connected. Their friendships and their bonds and their favors ran across vast reaches of country, so that when Ela's own valley failed, when the herds did not come, her people could send word along those threads and call on distant friends and move to where the food was and be taken in. The brow people lived in smaller worlds, tighter circles, closer to home. When their valley failed, they had fewer distant hands to reach for. A wider net catches you when you fall. Ela's kind had woven a wider net. None of this required a single act of cruelty. That is what makes it so hard to feel and so easy to miss. Ella's people did not need to kill the brow people. They only needed to be a little better at getting food in the same country, year after year, quietly, without malice, without even noticing. And when you are a little better at surviving than your neighbor, generation after generation, the slow mathematics of hunger does the rest. Ela's people held the good valleys. The brow people were pushed, without anyone deciding it, into the poorer land, the harder land, the higher and colder and hungrier margins, where their numbers thinned and thinned and thinned, until at last there were too few of them, spread too far apart, to find each other, to marry, to make the next generation. And a people that cannot make its next generation is already, though it does not know it, a people that has ended. Before we go further west and further into loss, I have to turn Ella's face, and yours, toward the east, because the brow people were not the only cousins we lost, and the second kind we lost is stranger and more ghostly than the first. Remember the third kind of human I asked you to draw? The people of the distant mountains that Ela knew only from stories carried down the long trade routes. We call them the denisovans, and here is how faint their ghost is. For the brow people, we have skeletons, skulls, whole graves. For the mountain people, for a very long time, we had almost nothing. A sliver of a finger bone, a single tooth. That is nearly all. A whole kind of human, a whole way of being a person. Spread it now seems across an enormous stretch of Asia, and we knew of their existence at first from a fragment of a fingertip you could hide under your thumbnail. So how do we know they were real? That Ela's stories of the mountain people were not just stories. The same way we know the brow people mixed with us. We know because they are still here, in the same quiet way, hidden inside living people. Along the eastern edges of the world, out into the far islands and the great southern lands, there are people alive today who carry the inheritance of the mountain people in their cells, a little of that vanished third kind woven into them. Just as the brow people are woven into others, the mountain people did not leave us a skeleton to mourn over. They left us themselves, scattered in fragments through the living, a ghost you can only see by reading the code inside a stranger's blood. And they left one gift so beautiful, I have to make sure you catch it. High up in the greatest mountains on earth, where the air is so thin that a lowland person climbing there gasps and sickens and cannot think straight, there are live peoples who breathe that thin air as easily as you breathe here at the bottom of the sky. Their bodies simply know how to do it. And when we ask where that knowledge came from, the answer is astonishing. It came from the mountain people, from the denisovans. Tens of thousands of years ago, when Ella's kind met and mixed with that vanished cousin, the mountain people passed a gift into our blood, an ancient trick for living where the air runs out. And that gift survived every year since, and it is why, today, a person can stand on the roof of the world and simply breathe. The mountain people are gone. But every time someone lives and works and raises children in the high, thin air, they are doing it in a small and literal way, on a piece of biology. Their vanished cousins handed them across 40,000 years. That is not nothing. That is a monument made of breath. And here is the last strange truth about the mountain people, the one that shows you how tangled all of this really is. That single finger bone, that sliver from the far cave, When we finally read the code inside it, told us something no one expected. The child that bone came from was not purely of the mountain people at all. Her mother's side reached back to the brow people, the neanderthals, and her father's side to the mountain people, the denisovans. Two vanished kinds of human, two of our lost cousins, had met and loved and made her. This was never a simple tree with clean, separate branches, our kind here, the brow people there, the mountain people somewhere else, each in its own box. It was a tangle, a web. Kinds of human meeting kinds of human, again and again, across 100,000 years, mixing and parting and mixing again, until the whole idea of neat, separate species starts to blur in your hands. There were many ways of being human, and they did not stay apart. They reached for each other, and now nearly all of those reaching hands are gone. There is one more we lost, and this one breaks the heart in a different way, because of how small they were and how alone. Remember the fourth kind, the tiny people on the island across the warm water, the ones no taller than a child. They lived on their island, cut off for a very long time, longer than we can easily imagine, a whole separate little world of human beings making their own small tools and lighting their own small fires and burying their own small dead, and they survived down there on that one island until something close to 50,000 years ago, when the record of them falls silent. And what silenced it? Here, more than anywhere, we have to be honest and say we do not fully know. Around the time they vanished, Ella's kind was spreading into that part of the world too, and perhaps the same slow story played out in miniature. The sicknesses, the competition, the arithmetic of an island's small and finite food. But an island is its own kind of trap, and it may have needed no help from us at all. A people on a small island is a fragile thing. There are not many of them to begin with, and there is nowhere to run, and there is only so much food. And when the ground itself is restless, as that island's ground was, prone to mountains of fire, then a single great eruption, a single bad turn of the deep earth, could snuff out a whole tiny kind of human in an afternoon, with no other human anywhere near. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe it was us. Maybe it was the fire in the ground. Maybe it was both. A fragile people already stumbling when the strangers arrived. The honest answer, the only honest answer, is that a kind of human that had survived on that island for longer than our whole civilization has existed vanished around the time our kind reached their part of the world, and that this same pattern, our arrival, their ending, repeated in enough places, with enough other cousins, to be a pattern and not an accident. We do not know exactly how the little people died. We only know that they were here, and that they are not here now, and that we are. Now come back west, back to Ela, because her own story is coming to the place. All these stories come too. The years had turned and turned. Ayla was no longer the young stick figure by the stream who had gone still at the sight of smoke across the valley. She was old now, drawn stooped and slow, her line of a body bent, and the brow people of her valley had dwindled from a thriving band to a handful to almost none. But in all those years, one thread had held. Because Ela had not only watched the brow people from the tree line, she had come to know one of them. Let me give him to you now, this one brow person, so that all the vanished millions are not just a number. Draw him broad and strong and heavy-browed, and call him by the sound Ella called him, a low, warm sound that meant, more or less, the steady one. Over the years, they had met at the edges of each other's worlds, at the trading, at the shared hunts that did not end in blood, at the stream. He had shown her, once, patient and unhurried, how his people struck those beautiful edges from the stone, guiding her clumsy hands. She had shown him the throwing stick. They had, in the way of two people who share a country and a lifetime, become something our languages barely have a word for, across a gulf of 40,000 years of separate becoming. And somewhere in those years, in a way the bones can record but never explain, the two kinds had become one child, a small stick figure with something of the tall, thin build of Ella's people and something of the strong, heavy brow of the steady ones, a child who was both and neither, a child in whom the two vanishing rivers of humankind ran together and went on. I want to be careful and honest here, because this is the part we most want to make into a fairy tale, and it may not have been one. We know, from the thread of the brow, people that survives in us, that such children were born and lived and had children of their own. We know the reaching happened. What we do not know, what the bones and the blood will never tell us, is what it felt like. Whether it was gentle or cruel, chosen or forced, the flowering of a long friendship, or a single hard night between strangers. We do not know how that child was seen, the mixed one, the both and neither, whether the band gathered the little one in with love or held the little one at arm's length as something strange, half of the wrong kind. The old bones are silent about the things that matter most, about who was loved and who was left out, about the inside of a life. All they tell us, plainly and without feeling, is that the child survived. The reaching worked, the thread got through. And whatever the truth of Ila's own bond, with the steady one, gentle or hard, tender or violent, we know that across all those valleys and all those years, enough such threads got through that a little of the brow people rode them all the way down into you. And then, one still cold morning near the end, the steady one did not rise. He was old, as Ela was old, the last of his kind for many days' walk in any direction, and his long 400,000-year lineage came, in him, on that morning, quietly to its end. Watch Ela, bent and slow, bury him. She does not leave him for the cold. She digs into the hard ground the way she once watched his people dig, all those years ago, across the valley, when she was young and afraid and did not yet understand that she was watching people. She lays him down with care. And she scatters over him the deep red ochre and the soft flowers, the gesture she first saw the brow people make over their own dead child, the gesture of a people who will not believe that death is the simple end of a thing. She learned grief's shape from them. Now she gives it back to the last of them. And when it is done, and she straightens up as far as her old back will let her, and looks out across the valley where the smoke of the brow people once rose every evening and now rises no more, she understands, finally and completely, that she has outlived not just a friend but a whole way of being human. The brow people are gone from her valley. Soon they will be gone from the world, and she was here for all of it. So sit with Ella in that silence and let us ask the question one last time, plainly, the way it deserves to be asked. Did we do this? Did Ella's people, our people, kill the other humans? And now, having walked the whole long way with her, we can give the honest answer, which is not the clean answer anyone wants, but is the true one. The answer is probably yes, in some ways, in some places, at some times, but almost certainly not only with spears, and almost certainly not as one great deliberate design to wipe our cousins from the earth. We killed them the way a flood kills, not the way a murderer kills. We carried sicknesses into them that emptied their valleys while we slept, and never knew we had done it. We were a little better at feeding our children in the same hard country, year after year, and the slow arithmetic of that small advantage pushed them into the margins and thinned them to nothing. The changing world was already grinding them down before we became many, and we were one more weight on a people who could not bear another. And yes, sometimes, in the autumn woods, over a dying deer, we spilled their blood, and they spilled ours. And in between all of that, we lay down with them and made children who carried them forward into us. It was not a war, it was not a mercy. It was a long, tangled, contradictory closeness between two kinds of human, spread across thousands of years, and at the end of it, only one kind was left standing, with its face intact, and the others were absorbed and pushed to the edges and gone. And here is where you have to choose, the way Ela, in her own wordless way, had to choose what to make of that. There is a comfortable version of this ending. In the comfortable version, what happened to the brow people and the mountain people and the little people of the island was simply nature. One kind of creature outcompeting another, no different from any animal replacing any rival, carrying no more guilt than the tide carries for the castle it takes. In the comfortable version, we can look at Ela burying the steady one and feel nothing heavier than a distant sadness, the way we feel about anything that lived long ago and is gone. And there is an uncomfortable version. In the uncomfortable version, our kind, from its very first steps out into the wide world, was already the kind of creature that outcompetes and displaces and, here and there, destroys other beings who were, by every measure that counts, people. People who made tools and kept fires, people who cared for their broken and carried their old, people who buried their dead with flowers and painted their own skin and looked up, the way Ela looked up on her hill, the way you can look up tonight, at the very same stars, and surely, wondered some of the same wordless things we wonder. The evidence does not let you off the hook by choosing for you. It does not cleanly support either version, the comforting one or the terrible one. It supports the messy one, the true one, the story of a long shared closeness that ended with one kind of human alone. And the strangest thing, the thing worth holding on to as we come to the end, is who is left to think about it. Because that one kind of human, the sole survivor, the last one standing on the emptied hill, is you. You are Ela's lineage. Hers is the fire that did not go out. And every other fire, the brow peoples and the mountain peoples and the little island peoples, and however many others we have not even found yet, every one of those fires burned down to ash, and the specific warmth of them, what it felt like to be that kind of person, in that kind of body, with those bonds and those fears and that particular way of seeing the world, is gone. And no amount of digging in the ground or reading the code in old bones will ever bring back the feeling of it. Those minds are gone. Those ways of being human are gone. The steady one, sitting by his fire in the cold, tending someone he loved, was doing something you would recognize instantly as human, and his whole kind, that whole way of being a person, has ended and will not come again. But not entirely. That is the last thing, the thing that changes how Ela chose to live out her final years, and maybe changes how you walk out of this. Because when Ela buried the steady one, she did not go home and let his memory die with him. Watch what she does instead. She takes the child, the both and neither, the little one in whom the two rivers run together, and she teaches the child the steady one's name and the low, warm sound it was made of. She shows the child, guiding those small hands the way the steady one once guided hers, how the brow people struck their beautiful edges from the stone. She sings the child what she can remember of their songs. She becomes, in her last years, not a conqueror, not even a survivor, but something better and harder and more deliberate. She becomes a keeper, a rememberer. She decides that if she is the one left standing, then it is her task to carry the ones who are not, to hold their name and their craft and their grief inside her own kind so that they are not wholly lost. And that child carried it to the next, and that one to the next, down and down the long line until here it is. Because they are not wholly lost. That is the truth that the code inside us insists upon. The truth Ela could feel in her arms but never name. In something between 1 and 4 out of every 100 pieces of the instructions that build most of the humans alive today, the brow people are still here. In the peoples of the Far East and the distant islands, the mountain people are still here, woven into us, riding in us. A small warm thread of every vanished cousin, carried forward on the very children that Ela and the steady one, and thousands of pairs like them across thousands of years, made together in the closeness before the ending. It is the only monument they have. Not a grave, not a statue, not a name carved in stone, a living thread inside the ones who remained. Every person on Earth who breathes the thin, high air on the roof of the world is, in a small and literal way, still running on the biology of the mountain people. Every non-African person alive carries a whisper of the brow people in the way their body fights off sickness, in 100 quiet workings they will never notice. The lost cousins wrote themselves into us, and we are the letter they are still, faintly, sending. Whether they would be glad of that, whether the steady one, if he could somehow know that a piece of his vanished kind lives on inside the very people who replaced him, would feel honored to be carried or insulted to be reduced to a thread in his conqueror's blood, is a question that no bone and no code and no amount of study will ever answer, and that we are perhaps not honest enough to answer for ourselves. The science can tell you, with more and more clarity every year, what most likely happened. The floods of sickness, the slow arithmetic of hunger, the changing world, the closeness and the children, here and there, the blood. What the science cannot tell you is how to feel about it. That part is left to you, standing where Ella stood, the last kind of human on a hill under a wide evening sky. Only now it is not Ela. It is the child, grown, the both and neither, in whom the two rivers run, standing on the same low hill where Ela once stood still at the sight of smoke across the valley. And beyond that, child, if you pull the drawing back and back and back, it is every one of us, all the way down the line, all the way to you, tonight, the one kind of human left, alone on a planet that used to be so much more crowded with minds, carrying inside us the only remaining trace of the cousins we lost. There were other kinds of us, once, other ways of being human, other minds that kept fires and buried their dead and looked up at these same stars and wondered. They are gone, and we are here, and the whole weight of our story, the most uncomfortable and most important thing about what we are, lives in the space between those two small facts. The other humans are gone. We remain. And a little of them remains in us, looking up, wondering under the very same stars.